Good evening, Common Council meeting, Tuesday, February 27th in City Hall at 6 o'clock. Call to order, roll call. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item C, identify possible conflicts of interest. Seeing none, move on to item D. Public comment period, correspondence. At this time, I will recognize those members of the public who have indicated a desire to address the council. Upon recognition by me, persons may address the council, first stating their name and address. The council may act on emergency matters introduced by members of the public, and you will each get 5 minutes from when you start. Our first public comment would be by David Ferry Heiserman. Yes, sir. Yep, come right up to the podium. There's a little button you can push. You'll see down on the bottom where the microphone is.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. State your name and address.
My name is David Heiserman, but I go by Feyre. I am at 1412 South Adams Avenue, apartment 319 in Marshfield, Wisconsin.
And did you want to?
I don't know much about this stuff, so I am part of the special needs scouts here in Marshfield. As a troop member, it's a requirement for a patch I'm trying to earn for community citizenship in the community. So I'm just coming for that.
That's perfect. Thank you. And any questions you have from any of us?
No.
At any point, just reach out. Okay.
Okay.
And thank you very much, and good luck getting your badge.
Thank you.
Our second public comment, Rachel Meisel.
Hi. Greetings, everyone. I'm here today because
Rachel, your name and address, please. That's
Rachel,
quite all right.
I'm sorry, Rachel Meisick, 306 East 5th Street, Marshall, Wisconsin.
Thank you.
I'm here to clarify some of the conversation pertaining to the hockey rink and the pickleball courts. And I've been watching various commission and board meetings, and I'm starting to get confused as to who are these people, what group is which, who belongs together, and who is separate. And with that being said, I have various quotes I would like to use so that you can say maybe why I followed that confusion. And the first quote I'd like to use is from a school board member, Mark Conradery, and it's from the July 17th, 2023 meeting, and the quote begins at 14 minutes and 35 seconds of the video. And he says, "I am not a professional. I don't know much about pickleball. The fundraising was successful with the dollar amount needed to complete the project. The district plans to move forward with the project. You will hear more from this coming from finance here shortly. We have talked about long-range facility planning. A debriefing session was held within the community planning committee to gather feedback for this process and approach used for the latest facility referendum, which is coming up in November. In the latest Hub City Times, dated February 21st, 2024, the similar words again are reiterated in the article, it's long-range building needs. I want to know, what building are you talking about? Are you talking about a hockey rink building? Are you talking about a pickleball rink building? Are you talking about a school building? Very vague words here about what you desire as a school board or whatnot. And then I cannot recall if it was the Planning Commission or if it's the Economic Development Board during the first week of February where statements were made about the hockey rink as a community center. These are all really vague words. And if you're just not following the conversation, you're going to get confused as to who's talking about what. I mean, earlier this weekend, then, it was brought to my attention that the pickleball rink or the pickleball court people went to an organization asking for funding, and that they were building in Bram Park. So that kind of clarified it a little more for me. But is there rinks or is there pickleball being built in McMillan too? I'm confused. And the second part of all this that's really concerning to me was the attitude expressed by Dean Anderson that no taxpayer money would be spent building the hockey rink. And he stated that at the January 30th, 2024 Common Council meeting. And I think that's just a little misleading. And the reason why I feel it's a little misleading is because they're asking for 18 acres of land. And this is all taxpayer-funded land, as well as the fact that the taxpayers improved the land with the roads and the curbs and, I'm so sorry, et cetera, all those things. So to say that taxpayers are not invested in a hockey rink that they're asking for this land for, it just doesn't make sense to me. So what I'm asking for is to clarify and be a little more honest about your intentions with this hockey rink. I'm not against a hockey rink. In fact, it was a cruel winter. What if we would have had that hockey rink? We would have been, buco bucks, all the surrounding communities coming to skate in an indoor rink. That's not what I'm here about. I'm here about because I'm feeling this is becoming a very clouded conversation. And in closing, I have a few speeches I like to paraphrase from really great American people. And this letter was penned by Bertrand Russell, and it's called the Russell-Einstein Manifesto. And the subject is the manufacturing and use of hydrogen bombs, but that's nothing to do here. It's just the words really struck me that they said. And he said, and I incorporated my words. Here lies before us if we choose a momentous effort to put Marshfield on the map, specializing in family entertainment. Shall we instead choose adversity because we cannot forget our quarrels or past transgression? I appeal to you as a human being, to human beings. Remember your oath and your integrity, and remember why you took office for not one specialized group, but for the good of all. And I'm just asking if perhaps in the future the Common Council would consider to vote on a subcommittee so that the funds being raised by the hockey rink people can be discussed by a subcommittee promoted by the Common Council and addressed monthly with a verbal, what's going on there, just so the conversation seems more clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Our third public comment? Steve Katona.
Steve Katona, 1614 Catherine Court in Marshfield. I am one of the three-person audit committee that the council created about a year ago. We'll be meeting with Jennifer Selensky, I believe is her name, and the external auditors Thursday. I called each of the council members and asked them what they would be interested in finding out. Madam Mayor, I did not call you. You were not there at the birthing, but if you feel free, go ahead. The council would like to see monthly presentations of journal entry. I don't think that needs to go to the external auditors, that's internal. Just a random top 3 issues that the external auditors felt important. The EMS fund was of concern. I can bring that up to the external auditors, and I will. I personally think those accounts receivables, performing or not performing, should be sold either monthly at auction or annually to a top bidder. Get it gone. A list of cash accounts with their inputs and outputs in the year-end residual cash. And a lot of people want to know what happens to the unspent budget. That's it.
Thank you, Steve.
Sure.
Any other public comment? Any other public comment? Seeing no other public comment, we'll go on to item E, approval of minutes, February 13th, 2024. We have a motion by Alderman Stauber, second by Alderman Tompkins. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote. Motion passes. Thank you. Item F, staff updates. Introduction of Carrie Edmonton, Assistant City Administrator / Community Development Director, presented by Steve Barg, City Administrator.
Thank you, Mayor. It's always a pleasure when we get to welcome a new employee and recognize them here at the beginning of their time with the city, put a face to the name that you've heard and that the public may be meeting for the first time. And I'm very excited and very pleased to have Carrie Edmondson with us here today. And she started yesterday as the city's first Assistant City Administrator / Community Development Director. I realize it's a long name. I keep pledging that it will fit on a business card. I hope it either has or does. But we're so grateful to have her here. She was able to shine among a number of other great candidates we had for the position. She has an AICP, is that correct? Certified Planner status. She graduated with a master's degree in public administration from California State University. Back in Minnesota, or I'm from Minnesota. I periodically say that. I don't know why I still do after all this time. Back in Wisconsin, she has most recently been a community development specialist and associate planner for the city of Wisconsin Rapids. She actually serves as the vice chair of the Village of Rib Mountains Plan Commission. We're excited to have her on board and hope you are as well. So I'd like to introduce to you Carrie Edmondson.
And Carrie, if you would just show yourself to the camera, come just right in front and just, yes. Thank you. And there she is. Absolutely. Thank you again, Carrie.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you, Steve, for that great introduction. And yes, we are thrilled beyond words. Item G, Mayor's comments. I am going to stand as I always do when I read a proclamation. And this is going to be designating Marshfield as a Purple Heart City. Proclamation, Purple Heart City. Whereas the city of Marshfield, Wisconsin and our community have a great admiration and the utmost gratitude for all the men and women who have and are selflessly serving their country and their community in the armed forces. And whereas veterans have paid the high price of freedom by leaving their families and communities and placing themselves in harm's way for the good of all. And whereas the contributions and sacrifices of the men and women who serve the armed forces have been vital in maintaining the freedoms and way of life enjoyed by our citizens. And whereas many men and women in uniform have given their lives while serving in the armed forces, and whereas citizens of our community have received the Purple Heart Medal as a result of being wounded while engaged in combat with an enemy force, construed as a singular meritorious act of essential service. And whereas the city of Marshfield seeks to remember and recognize veterans who are recipients of the Purple Heart Medal. And whereas I proclaim the city of Marshfield, Wisconsin to be a Purple Heart City, honoring the service and sacrifice of our nation's men and women in uniform, wounded or killed by the enemy while serving to protect our freedoms. Therefore, be ordinated to the city of Marshfield, Wisconsin as follows. Now, therefore, this will be resolved on this 23rd day of May, 2024. I, Lois T. Strick, Mayor of the City of Marshfield, supports the City of Marshfield becoming a Purple Heart City in recognition of our community's Purple Heart Medal recipients. Item H, council comments. Seeing none, move on to city administrator's update.
Not a lot tonight, but I will report that we're about ready to roll out the 2024 edition of the facade grant and interior conversion program. It's looking to be renamed. It sounds like there's a new name coming around the bend, but an opportunity for us to partner with local businesses in the downtown area to help them make improvements to get those buildings to a greater tax base, more vitality, and just keep improving our downtown area. So watch for that to come out real soon here. Also, a few of you have signed up for the Housing Summit. We're going to Wisconsin Rapids on Thursday, March 7th. Pretty excited about that. Wood County's really taken an active role in the last few months in terms of the housing task force, trying to look at residential construction and residential issues as more of a comprehensive county-wide problem or county-wide topic. And so we'll come back hopefully with some good information that we can share with everybody after that summit. And then finally, I just want to thank the election workers. I want to thank and commend Jessica and her staff and all the staff people and all the volunteers. We kicked off what may be another year of 4 elections, very possibly, and they do incredible work. It was a higher than normal turnout for a typical February primary, and they did a great job. So I just want to thank them for what they do. That's all I have tonight.
Thank you, Steve. Reports from commissions, boards, and committees. Seeing none, move on to item K, consent agenda. Motion by Alderman Worman, second by Alderman Tompkins. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote. Consent agenda passes. And we can skip item L, which action on items removed from the consent agenda. Item N, presentation, proposed compensation plan update, introduced by Sarah Dressel, Human Resources Director, presented by Elena Mash from McGrath.
Good evening. So tonight we have Milena, who is with McGrath Human Resources Group. She's been working with us on our compensation study that began last year. Tonight she's going to be presenting to you some updated information, and she does have a PowerPoint presentation that she will utilize during this discussion. So I want to welcome Milena.
Good evening, everybody. Can I
Oh, sorry, Milena, I think you're on mute. Oh, now we can hear you.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Can someone give me a thumbs up that you can hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right. Oh, well, good to see you all again. And it's been a couple of months. We are at a point now in our process where we are going to be ready to roll out our final findings and recommendations for the organization. And I felt that it was going to be best if we could, I'm going to just kind of do a little bit of moving around here, if we could tee up the Common Council to let you know what's going to be coming when that final report is finalized and presented. And I have spoken with the city administrator and your human resources director, and I have indicated that when we are ready to present everything in final report, that I am happy to be there. And I hope that I'll be able to be on site for you, because it seems the last couple of times I haven't been able to actually be physically there. So what we're going to talk through here is just kind of go back and take a couple extra slides and just refresh where we are at with your market update. Last year, we went out to the following public comparables, and we collected all of the market data from those organizations so that we could get a better understanding of how the city of Marshfield organization that we collected multiple data point ranges for looking like, along with the incumbent rates, so we could see exactly how your organization is paying against actual incumbents and those other organizations as well. If you recall, the last meeting that I was at with you, we went through some charts so that I could show you exactly how you are doing against that comparable market. And from that point, we started going into a little bit more of history of where you are at now and where I feel like you need to go. Back in 2018, stated your salary structure, but within once we got to a certain point in that salary range, we found at that time that smaller steps would have been proper, a competitive market area, and then we could start seeing those increases down a little bit, and that between those step adjustments, along with the cost of living increases employees would be receiving, that would be sufficient. However, what we have found over the last few years is that the market has taken some serious change, and we are up against, in the human resources world, we are up against a major human capital concern, because there just simply are more positions open than we have qualified candidates. We've had a large turnover in public sector and in private sector as well. And it's the cost of living and the CPI across the nation and locally has absolutely driven wages up. And so what we're finding now is that with the model that we currently built for you back in 2018 no longer is really working for the organization anymore. And so when I was here the last time speaking in front of you, one of the things that we had talked about was compensation philosophy and where we should be poising the city against the array of data. You can be an organization that is not reaching the average, and typically when that happens, you have higher turnover, you have a lot more training costs, you have a lot more overtime costs, and you're expending the dollars, you're spending them though in different line items, ones that you don't necessarily want to be expending. You could be an organization that is leading the average, where you are the organization everyone wants to try to match. I do not think that the city build is in that type of a situation. Communities that pay a little bit less than you. And that's where I've established my recommendations for the organization. And that's going to mean employees are going to look at those ranges and know there are other communities that are going to pay a little bit more than you, and we accept that that is going to happen. There are other reasons why you know, in terms of employee engagement and benefits and well-being, that an employee might decide to work for the city of Marshfield. So last fall, when we talked, I was offering up some options of what I felt were considerations. The first one was that we could simply do an across-the-board adjustment on the salary ranges, but that didn't necessarily fix the issues that we have with those step increases being very small at this point, and whether or not those increases were going to be meaningful enough for the employees to retain them long-term. So I also explored going through some market structural changes, and one of those that I had considered was a 14-step model. And then the other one that I had considered was a 12-step model. The 12-step model at that time, and I had indicated that that was where I was leaning heavily, was intended to, number one, make sure that you had equity in percentage adjustments, salary adjustments across the board, and would, it certainly closes down or shuts down the number of steps that you're going to have, because we don't want your range to be too wide, but felt a little bit more consistent and more equitable for your employee base. It certainly then allows the organization to continue to look at performance management, you know, so that it's not necessarily automatically, you know, it's not a guarantee of performance. It's not a guaranteed pay. It is supposed to be based on performance management. Sorry, it took me a minute to get that out. So we are to the point where we have our recommendations and they are in final draft form. I am ready to get that final report ready for you. And I wanted now this evening to kind of get us caught up to where I am at. This is a snapshot of what that final report is going to explain to you, and to give you some time to digest that well before the final report is actually released. So I have updated your salary schedule. I have utilized the step model where we're going to give you 12 steps, and each of those steps is going to be valued at 2.5%, as I finish saying. Those salary ranges now in 2024. That does not necessarily mean that we have to do it right during the implementation, but at some point during the year, those salary ranges should be adjusted. This is very, yes, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt. I think if you turn off your video, we're getting a lot of interference where you're cutting out. So we heard the outcome number 1, but once you got to number 2, you started to cut out, so we didn't catch that. So I don't know if turning off your video might help with that. Sorry about that.
I apologize. Let's see if that works a little bit better. I apologize. I am traveling, and so sometimes I'm at the whim of the Wi-Fi of the organization that I am at. So I apologize. I'll go back then in terms of the outcomes. The first one, again, like I said, we have the 12-step model, and those are going to be 2.5% salary adjustments. That makes it most equitable across the board for all of your employees. It does not matter if you've been there for 1 year or 10 years, it's all going to be the same increase each year. From that point then, all of the recommendations that I have built are based on 2023 market data. I have not trended this for 2024 yet. the organization is going to, when you're talking about your implementation strategy, there should be some discussion of how you trend those dollars into 2024. A prime example of that is going to be when you're looking at the difference in compression between your union to your non-union. When when Sarah provided me the 2024 information for at least one of the collective bargaining agreements, so that I see what's happening, and some of the alleviation of the compression has already started to chip away, even with the recommendations that I have. And what's going to help that is just making sure that those salary ranges are going to continue to align with the market. And you're going to do that by applying a cost of living adjustment to the salary ranges every year. When I built the salary model, I started with making adjustments to the salary ranges by 10%. Now, that should not be surprising because we talked about that last fall, that was where I expected we were going to be starting. And then from that point, I went into each of the individual positions, and we were looking at whether or not we needed to make any additional adjustments to help match the market a little bit better. That results in some of your positions going down in a pay grade, and it also results in others going up a pay grade. So even though the ranges themselves are adjusting by about 10%, in actuality, what you have is positions that are going to be experiencing anything from a 5% adjustment up to a 35% adjustment. Now, I will say that the 35% is limited to just a couple of positions. It is not, that is a kind of a beacon, and it's very, very narrowly focused. The majority of the positions are going to be somewhere between 5%, and sometimes they could be upwards of 15% for their changes. When we looked at that, then I also needed to make sure that we have not broken any of our internal comparability or our internal alignments that we did in 2018. All of that has been reviewed at this point, and I feel comfortable with where all of those salary ranges are. From that, then, what you're going to find when you see these salary ranges coming in the future is that most of the positions in the lowest of those pay grades have moved up, and that is to better align them with the average market. You're going to find that some of your lowest paid salary ranges now are vacant. I have not gotten rid of them. They are there available for the city. If we need to use them in the future, we might have to recraft them a little bit. I did not feel that it was necessary to remove them, but generally speaking, grade 121 is now going to be the entrance into the organization. And I did build one new pay grade, and that is to help accommodate your new assistant city administrator to your city administrator. We needed just a little bit more room at the top end of the model, but we held those increases to a minimum as much as possible. Now, when you also see the recommendations when they come out in the final report, you're going to see that we have made some classification changes. And what that means is job title. That does not mean that there's going to be any kind of change in responsibilities. That is certainly not within the scope of our work. But you are going to see that we have removed some titles. We've changed some titles to better match what's happening in the market. And we've also clarified internally what some of those levels within a particular job family might mean, or to better clarify the definition or how an employee can progress through those ranges. One of the primary, when you see it, one of the primary changes that you're going to see right away is that we've got some clerical changes. And back in 2017, 2018, this was a little bit of a challenge for the organization. When we walked out of Act 10, most of the municipal organizations were heavily relying on administrative support positions. And we found that after the end of the collective bargaining agreements, there were just simply a lot of clerical levels. Over the past decade, it's safe to say that the clerical staff now there are not as many of them. And of those that you have, the work product that the demand that's been put on those positions is getting to be more and more sophisticated. And because of that, there is a need for fewer levels. And so I have reduced the number of levels of your support positions. So now you are no longer going to see administrative associate 1, 2, 3, 4, and then where there was also an office assistant. We've got those rolled down into 2 different levels now. We have just an administrative associate, no leveling, and then we have an office coordinator. Those are going to be some of your clerical-based positions in the organizations that they do, yes, the clerical, but they do a lot of the office management minus the supervision of staff. So all of that's going to be coming out when you see the final report. Now, let's talk through, though, when you get the final report with the final recommendation, and this is really where I want to tee up the conversation of what's to come. I have costed this, and that's really where the starting point begins, because the majority of the work by McGrath is done, but yet your project in total is absolutely not done, because there's going to have to be some planning that goes into this. So hold on. When I costed out this model, I wanted to understand and show you where the minimum implementation is coming in at versus the maximum implementation. So what I did was, once I built all of those salary ranges, I placed all of the employees in the same methodology as the last study, where we put employees at the step closest to what they were earning, so that there was not a decrease in pay. No one is going down in pay. And by doing it with that methodology, the cost of implementation based on 2023 wages is $243,000 and some odd change. Certainly we know people are coming and going, and so that number is a little bit fluid, but generally I think that it's safe to say $250,000 for that. If we were to continue to align your staff at the current step rate that they are at, so if they were at step 4 on the old model, they go to step 4 on the new model, then that cost would be $686,000. So it's just shy of $700,000. This is oftentimes where organizations want to go in terms of their costing, but it becomes a matter of whether they can do that. And most organizations will admit that they just cannot support that. They cannot fund that right away. So I'm feeling like one of our goals of over the course of what's to come here is to identify the implementation strategy for the organization, understanding that this is a very large dollar amount that we're talking about. It does not include anything for 2024, and you have a lot of other financial priorities that are in your queue for consideration. So what I'm hoping for with what is left to come here for the organization is to have some direction from the council to administration with some parameters on the financials. And I'm going to be getting ready to wrap up my report and providing that to the city. I would like for us to be able to do that timely so that I can talk a little bit about that in my report, but also when we are releasing this final information, to have some semblance of a plan, or a plan to have a plan in terms of what we're going to do financially, so that employees, any employee at the city of Marshfield, does not get the report and then not know what's going to be done about it. And so therefore, I'm hoping that we are going to be able to do this collectively, where my report, as it comes out, is going to be tied to very closely with some of the financial planning that the city is going to be taking on over the course of the next couple of months. So with that, I appreciate your time, and I will take any questions that you might have.
Alderman Tompkins?
Thank you so much, Melina. I just need to clarify. I believe when we started this process about a year ago, and please, anyone who knows I think we paid extra money so that we would have a sense of salary ranges and not steps. That's what I'm recalling. So here I'm in this report, I'm seeing a 12-step report, and I'm wondering, are we also getting a salary range that I do believe we paid extra for?
So one of the things that we did at the beginning of the project was to discuss changing your model. And that could include ranges, or at least to explore changing them into more of a range model. And when you have a range, you have a minimum, a midpoint, and a maximum. And we did explore that. I talked with a number of elected officials at the beginning of the project, and what their feelings were, what their concerns were with the compensation structure. Also, I met with your administration and I met with your department directors on how they felt the current model was working and whether we needed to completely disassemble the model and start all over. The recommendation, and I talked about this during the October update, was, and I'm going to go back a couple of slides. This was one of the slides from the October meeting where I gave, it could have been November, where I gave an update, and there was that the open range was not a recommendation for the city. And that is partly because the organization has been struggling somewhat with providing the cost of living adjustment. And the structure of STEP allows the employees that progression, even if it is not a large amount, it is still something. And range models organization utilize the range to meet the cost of living and performance adjustment benefits of an open range, but then there's certain detriments that come with an open range as well. I determined that the model that your organization has is not particularly broken. The step structure is not broken. It just needs to be updated around it. So I determined that a range is not going to be aggressive.
Okay, thank you. If I may, just one more question. If you determined that we didn't need a range and that was not part of the product that we were purchasing for this study, did we still, because it was a significant amount of money that we paid extra for that part of the study, did we still pay? I'm pretty sure it was in the thousands of dollars that we paid extra. Am I correct or no?
So there was, and I probably will need to pull out, I understand what you're talking about. What we did was, you're getting the ranges. All of the, when you get your new model, you will have ranges. It's just that those ranges are going to have steps in it. So you will get those ranges. They just are not going to be an open range. The discussion that we had, and where you're going with the cost of the proposal that we put together for the city, was to make updates to, do your market update. That was kind of the base. And then there was the engagement of the council. And then there was whether or not we needed to completely rebuild the model, I think is what it was. We have not actually billed the city for the entirety of the project. And if that is the case, like, for example, if we had it within the scope to rebuild it, but we didn't rebuild it, we're not going to charge the city for that.
Thank you so much.
Alderman Werman.
You're welcome.
Hey, thanks, Melina, again for the presentation. I wanted to jump back. I think it's another slide or two. And I just wanted to clarify to make sure I understood correctly. But I think, did you say that there would be a 5 to 35% change in range?
So on point number 4 on the screen is pay grade changes that we've got. We have some positions when you look at what their range changes are. Now, I'm not talking about employee wages. I'm talking about how the range has changed from the old minimum to the new minimum. And so, yes, we do have some positions whose ranges have changed as low as 5%. And then there are 2 positions whose ranges have changed 35%. And then the rest of the employees or the rest of the positions are falling, within that range. That's your low to high.
Can you just kind of walk me through that? And I don't know that you have these numbers on the spot, so I apologize for putting you on the spot, but can you give me a rough idea of number of ranges that we're talking about? Yeah, I know you said it's very small for a 35% change, but I'm just thinking, is this 100% of ranges have changed? Are we looking at like 80% of the ranges have changed and 60 of those are 5 to 15? Can we get kind of an idea on that? And then maybe the effects of that as you would see it play out if we were to adopt that and those changes took place?
So all of the ranges have adjusted. 100% of the ranges have adjusted. And so when you see them, you will see that all of the ranges have adjusted by 10%. What we've done then is moved some positions up or down to better match what's happening in the market. And so the number of actual positions that have moved, which is what's causing the deviation of between the 5 and the 35, is probably, and I'm going to just kind of ballpark it here for you. I would say we're probably talking 20 positions.
Okay, thank you on that. And then I wanted to follow up too on the costs that you had listed before, the 243 and the 686. Is that, so are we saying that that is like an additional cost that we'd be taking on top of the current wages if we were to implement this?
That is correct. This would be base building for you. So in order to get all of your employees off of the old model and into the new model, it's going to cost an additional $243,000 by the methodology of placing them on the step closest to what they were earning without taking a decrease. No one gets a decrease. If you were to lateral them into the new program, so if, for example, they were on the old step 8 and you want them to go to the new step 8, and that preserves their placement within the structure, that is the higher cost of the two, and that is typically not where organizations go, but most organizations at least want to understand what that cost would be, so they understand what that top ceiling rate is.
Gotcha, and that makes a lot of sense. And the reason I wanted to ask on that is for a little clarity on the sense of, is this what it takes to kickstart this new program? And then have we considered long-term effects, like the next 5 years, what that difference would be with the new STEP program versus what we're on currently?
And that's a very good question. And no, that has not yet occurred. We are to the point now where I'm comfortable with I'm calling them the final draft. And I'm comfortable getting that wrapped up and then turning that over to the city so that the city can start running their iterations of what is this going to look like in the future. So, how sustainable is that? One of the conversations before we even get to that point, though, is what would the implementation look like? And I'm saying it's going to cost you $243 just to get into the new program and get started. There's going to have to be an entire conversation about how do we accomplish that. And then after that, then comes what you're talking about of, all right, is this sustainable 5 years out? Based upon a certain percentage of turnover, what is that number going to truly look like for you?
Thank you.
Alderman Wagner.
Thank you. I too was a little disappointed that there wasn't any better addressing of the range question. But I'm somewhat resigned to the fact that we're going to end up with the same old again. And the thing that's always troubled me is we try and keep, or the mechanism we use to try and keep our pay scales competitive is adjust them annually to the cost of living, or the infamous or famous COLA, if you wanted to put it that way. The problem we've got with it is that we're, if we're lowering the number of steps to get to the maximum for any particular job classification, any particular range, then, and the thing from median to the top range is going to be at 2.5 also. The steps were always at 2.5, but at the same time, we will be going in there and adjusting the scale itself with a COLA for the cost of living. And so the numbers we end up with aren't like the 243, where they're getting closer, edging closer to the 686. And this is why I asked to see some options about how we could deal with this, because basically we have employees complain, so, well, you only gave me a 2.5% COLA. Yeah, well, you got a 2.5% COLA and you got a 2.5% stip. Merry Christmas. That's the way it works. And yet it comes to the detriment of the city. And I guess I'm just troubled by it, and I'm anxious to see what's going to go, but I do think, well, let me clarify one thing. Are you asking for the council tonight to give you some parameters to where to go from here? Is that correct?
No. I think I might have to direct that question to the city administrator. Tonight, my purpose was to give you a snapshot of what is to come. I'm not sure that there's an action item per se, but that is, I guess I would ask for city administrator to help answer that question.
Yeah, Melena's job is to provide us with a report, and she still hasn't given us a final report. We're expecting that soon. But to show us what's out there in the market, how we compare, where we're deficient, where we're not. And I think our job ultimately is going to be take that information, look at the costing information, and determine how we can begin making steps toward getting to where we need to be. And you look at some of the numbers and you realize it's not going to be in one fell swoop. It's going to be a process. But we've been talking about with everything from the employee satisfaction survey to a number of things. The turnover issue that we faced in the last 2 or 3 years is certainly compensation is a part of it. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to come up with a strategy, working together, council and staff, as to how we're going to implement this in a way that we can afford, but in a way that gets us to where the market is, so that employees are being treated commensurate with their skills and abilities and what other comparable cities are paying. And that's kind of where I see things. And Melena can be part of that, but that's not really her ultimate role. Her ultimate role was kind of getting us to the point where we understand where we are in comparison with the market.
Alderman Weigel?
Thank you. I'll just keep this brief. Just so I have my expectations set properly for when the final report's done, is there going to be a recommendation section on how to maintain this sustainably? Because my concern here is that I'm looking at, we just did this 5 years ago, 5 and change, and we're now looking at a $250,000, bill here just to make sure that we're competitive. As far as I'm concerned, as far as businesses where I've worked, we've stayed competitive. When I say we, I mean the businesses, without having to revamp the entire HR pay schedule. So in my mind, and maybe I'm just all wet and in left field, but in my mind, we should be able to have a pay schedule that pays our employees properly, not underpaying them, but that doesn't need a massive revamp every 5 years. Is that going to be part of the final report, or am I hoping for something that's not going to come?
Well, I think it's a good question. And what we do is provide you with, maintenance of effort. And we did that with the original study back in 2018. One of the challenges that you've been experiencing in the last several years is that when you look back at the cost of living adjustments, that would be, whether whatever economic number that you're using, the city has not been able to provide or put that onto the salary schedule. And that has been a part of the reason why you've been falling behind, which has resulted in what I would consider a pretty significant update. So, what we can do is we can reiterate those recommendations that you're taking a look at what that economic indicator should be along with the step adjustment each year. And if you can do that, most often when organizations do a market update, and market updates, we do recommend that an organization try to do every 3 to 5 years to capture any kind of blips that might be occurring in the market. Typically, if you're maintaining that cost of living economic indicator, you have less adjustment, right? This is a big major shift simply because of that not happening over the last several years. But yes, we can reiterate that in our report for you.
Okay, and so then just to make sure I have it understood correctly then too, am I correct in phrasing it as the biggest reason that we're lagging behind is that we did not sufficiently address COLA?
I think you have two things. Well, two things that I can address anyway. Number one has been the COLA, and then number two has been just the sheer change in the market. And there has been very few organizations that have come away unscathed from that. You are just experiencing the double whammy that the labor market has significantly changed over the last couple of years for a lot of different reasons. Plus, you have not maintained the schedule with an economic indicator.
Okay, and then just one final question. I'll defer to you on this because you're much better versed than I ever will be on this. How dumb of an idea is it to attach the COLA to the CPI index?
Well, if you do, what we find is that it's not dumb, but it's also a challenge when you have the 7.4 and the 8% because how do you plan for that? So what we find is that most organizations, if they're going to follow the CPI, maybe look at averaging that out more in organizations that are following the true CPI are doing a 3 to 5 year average so that you can kind of pay for those adjustments over the course of a couple of years and not necessarily feel it as hard. There is certainly the WERC indicator, but oftentimes what we talk to our clients about is go back to your comparable and find out what it is that they are doing with their salary schedules and follow, average out what's happening within those 25 or 30 communities that we use. Because if we do a market update again in another 5 years, we're going to start with that same list and we're going to say what's changed off of that list. And what they're doing is really a much better reflection of your market because that's who we determined collectively who your market really truly is.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mayor. You had mentioned earlier that the ranges will be included with the full report when it comes out. I'm just kind of curious, will we also receive any kind of detailed information on that, like what municipalities or what private sector type positions that was? Because the whole purpose behind this was making sure that we're competitive and that the employees here are being reimbursed appropriately, which I completely agree with, but it's obviously going to be a challenge and we will have to work through the details, but I guess that information, at least from my perspective, is going to be important through that analysis rather than just seeing a range that we don't know where it came from. And if it's not included, could we have it included?
So what we do when we will have your ranges aligned to a specific part of the market, and that will be listed in the final report so that you know where we have anchored you is really how I try to describe that. And then my job, and I apologize for the noise, I'm going to just mute myself just for a quick second here, folks. I apologize for that. I had about 30 young children walking into my area. So what we typically do then, when you bring on a consulting firm, our job is to make sure that through our methodology that we have used our data and our analysis to align you at the minimum, at that specific anchor point, and at the maximum to make sure that that is aligned with the market. That is the service that you purchase from us, along with making that final recommendation. So typically the market data and that analysis piece that analysis piece anyway is not typically turned over to the client because it is our work product. Certainly we can have, Steve have a conversation with Victoria McGrath if that wants to be discussed any further. But the recommendations, I spend that time running that analysis and developing those recommendations, and they're recommendations as a whole. It's quite an elaborative process that we use when we are looking at physicians and their analysis and that market. And we've put everyone through that methodology. So I think, short of, I guess, just saying the recommendations will be given to you in totality. And I'm hoping that the focus is going to be on, from the council's perspective, is going to be more on how is it that we are going to accomplish the implementation of this if we accept the recommendation, not necessarily going into the weeds of every position placement, just because that is an entire process. And I work through that with administration.
I'd just like to take a minute to really commend those of you on the council, a couple of you at least, who've referenced the idea of sustainability of looking forward into the future, because I've been here now for 13 years, was part of the Carlson-Detman study back in 2012 and 2013. That turned out to be, I think, a decent product. McGrath in 2017 and 2018, which I thought was a better product. And here we're wrapping up now with Milena on an update. But the real issue is ultimately, how do you keep up? Can you make a commitment to it? How can you do it in hard times? So I know nobody wants to be back in this room or hear about other people back in this room in 2029 having the same conversation. It's painful. So I really would applaud those of you who are already thinking ahead to how to make it work on an ongoing basis after we get to where we want to be. That'll be a big part of the implementation plan. And I look forward to the conversation with staff leaders and council on how to make this happen. It's going to be some work, but we need to do it.
Any other comments or questions from council members? Seeing none, Milena, thank you very much for that report. I look forward to hearing from you and hopefully seeing you in person next time. Have a great night.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Good night.
Item N, second reading of ordinance number 1508, weights and measures regulations, presented by Jordan Munger, accounting manager.
Hello, everyone. So this is, I guess, the second ordinance reading of the weight and measures fee that would be going out to primarily the supermarkets and gas stations that exist within our city boundaries. I think it's 60 or so different organizations last time I checked. All of the information has been presented in the packet before you and was presented at the previous council meeting. Do you have questions?
We have a motion by Alderman O'Reilly, a second by Alderman Giles. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, please vote. Motion passes. Thank you. Item O, request to approve budget resolution number 03-2024, transferring funds from Fund 235 Communications for the purchase of new studio lighting, presented by Tom Laust, Communications Director.
Good evening, and thank you. I presented at the Finance Budget Personnel last Tuesday. That was voted in favor of doing this, and I'll review what I had mentioned in that report. What we're doing is requesting funds out of the 235 fund, and this is for new studio lighting that is to be used in the new build out downstairs in this building for our communications department. Why am I asking this? Our current lighting is about 20 years old. It can no longer be purchased. It's basically obsolete. It's very difficult to find parts and bulbs. And if we were to use it, it would require additional wiring, probably removal of the existing ceiling structure, and cause a big change in the build-out process. And I can't guarantee it's going to work really much longer. We've already kept it together quite a bit and put zero money into it, but we've been lucky. So like I said, I don't recommend using that if we don't have to. And plus, there would be concerns of safety concerns of having cords on the floor like we do currently right now. And it would probably go against any kind of code and electrical hazards. So just to give you a little update, our estimated fund balance before this resolution 3-2024 right now is $83,683.95. Again, this is from not the general fund. This is from the VSP fees, video service provider fees, formerly franchise fees. Would be $62,678.95, and that is at the end of 2024. So that would include this budget that was passed earlier. So I'll take any questions that you have. I'm looking for a motion.
We have a motion on the table by Alderman Spiro, second by Alderman Tompkins. Any questions, comments for Tom? Seeing none, please vote. Motion passes. Thank you. Item P, request to approve budget resolution number 04-2024, transferring funds from, oops, I'm sorry, I just said that. Item Q, oh boy. Request to approve budget resolution number 05-2024.
No, you were right. There are two of them.
Oh,
Tom has.
okay.
That's okay. All right. It starts out the same.
It does start the same. Okay, let's try this again. Item P, request to approve budget resolution number 04-2024, transferring funds from Fund 235 Communications for the extension of an existing lease for space at 630 South Central Avenue, presented by Tom Laux, Communications Director.
Alrighty, thank you. As you know, we're located yet at Old City Hall on the 5th floor, Old Clerk's office, and we need some more time right now because we're really busy here in the next several months, especially with election coverage that we're doing, and we definitely don't want to miss that out next month. So we'll be working on that quite a bit, and it'd be very difficult to try to do that in our move. But more importantly, it's not finished. Right now, it's out for bid. So we need more time. If you're give us more time, it wouldn't cost too much. It costs $4,303.53 each month, $1,434.51. It goes up just a little bit. The good thing is the Steinleys are not going to make us sign a lease, and our lease does end the 31st of March. That's why I'm coming to you. So they'll do a month-by-month basis for the time being, and no extra, just a 3.5% CPI rate. So that would give us extra time, and with that, I did the math here. We would, after that, if this passes, it would be $58,375.42 left in that fund. So looking for a motion to extend for 3 more months. And that could change, depends on how the bids go and how things go, but I look for 3, it could be less. If I have to go for more, then I'll have to come back here.
We have a motion on the floor by Alderman Spiro, second by Alderman Tompkins. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote. All in favor? Yes. Motion passes. Thank you.
Alrighty, thank you.
Item R, response to request from Councilmember Spiro's review of... Oh my gosh. Okay. Request to approve budget resolution number 05-2024, revising principal and interest payments in the approved 2024 budget for TIF District Number 9, presented by Jennifer Solinsky, Finance Director.
Good evening. Each year at about this time, the Finance Department makes its annual principal and interest payments. And while I was doing so and double checking the budget, I realized I had not fully budgeted the amount of principal and interest in TIF District Number 9. So with that, I am asking for Common Council approval to increase the budget in TIF District 9 for $175,000 for principal and $64,042.50 for interest. This comes out of the increment for that district, so it's just a right sizing of the budget to what actual will occur in expenditures. So with that, I ask for approval of budget resolution 05-2024.
We have a motion by Alderman Spiro, second by Alderman Tompkins. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote. Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item R, response to request from Councilmember Spiros, review of EMS services presented by Jordan Munger, Accounting Manager.
Council, I'm going to try and share my screen here, but I might need some help on this because I don't usually share. Oh, it's up there. Okay, so if it's up there, it's good. All right, I'm going to try and go through this as quickly as I can. However, I do want to remind you, good things do take time, so good questions do take time to answer. So thank you for your patience. I do appreciate it. It did take us a while to kind of compile this in a presentation that was, I think, easily digestible for everyone. We held it back at FPC last week, Thursday, and it went well, so I hope you all enjoy it. So on the 2023 review of EMS services, there were questions on contracts and terms, overtime usage and Kronos abilities, intercepts and interfacility transfers reporting from 2023. So what I want to do is I just want to kind of break this up into little pieces. When asked about, what types of contracts, or we don't like the contracts, or what are the contracts making, we have to understand, really step back, what contracts are we asking about? So is it just the MCHS agreements? And if it is, then those two agreements above are kind of what we're talking about as far as revenue generating contracts from MCHS. We have a laundry list of contracts that are related to the EMS service, many of which that we're not going to talk about tonight. They're listed there. The terms are listed out there for you. We also have 13 township contracts, which I just couldn't fit on the screen. So there's information in there that really, when we want to ask the questions, I'm trying my best to try and answer those as well. But there is a lot out there. So I'm trying to stratify the data and tell you the answers that meet your needs. So if a contract does have an auto renewal, then is only terminated if the city or the other party is given a notice of the termination. So many of these contracts, you'll notice, have auto renewals. And what that means is these contracts are evergreen so long as we don't give notice to terminate within a certain time frame, nor does the other party give a notice to terminate within that same time frame. So we don't technically always have to come back. We just do if we see that there's a benefit to or need to. So moving forward, when it comes to the intercept agreement, it's part of the Advanced Life Support Intercept Services Agreement. And I want to stress the importance of this agreement. So this service covers an emergent life-threatening case whereby Marshfield is responding to help another EMS provider in the community. We are sending our people out to meet others on the highway because they need our help. This is a life that we're talking about. So it's difficult to quantify. However, what's not difficult to quantify is the billable rate. How much does it cost for us to cover fees for labor, supplies, mileage, wear and tear on equipment and overhead? Currently, our 2023 billable rate is $525 per trip. And yes, this does cover the items that we were talking about. In 2024, the rate was $530, or is now $530.78 per trip. The reason being is because it's a CPI formula that's in the contract that increases over time. So MCHS pays the city for each trip regardless of patient payment, and canceled trips are $100 each, up to $5,000 per year. And yes, we do charge that. So if we're out on a call, we're midway through, we get a call back and we get it canceled, we still charge the $100. And we still get paid that $100. So again, when we were looking at that before, we had the two agreements. This is the second one. So there's a interfacility transfer. This is a little bit less emergent. It's more so from the standpoint of you're transporting a patient from facility to facility. And let's say, hospital A is asking us to go there and bring the patient to hospital B. So it's different in the sense that we don't receive a payment from MCHS for this. We receive a patient from the patient's insurance and the patient potentially themselves. So there's a base transport fee for this service, and we bill mileage. Over half of the transports we perform are between Marshfield and Neelsville. We can and do turn these requests down if there's not enough staff to cover them. That is evidenced later on in the report. So now we're switching to overtime usage and Kronos capabilities. So what can we do with our time clocking system? A lot of this I like to refer to as kind of a chicken and egg scenario. So later on, Kronos allows for notes to be entered in the overtime clock-ins. And we do put those in. The fire staff does enter this information as best they can. Fire EMS currently uses those notes fields to indicate if a shift shortage, training, meeting, interfacility transfer, etc. has caused the overtime. However, there are some limitations. How does one determine every aspect of overtime usage? Let's give you an example. We have a 911 call come in. Concurrently, we have a transfer occur. What caused the overtime? We have a person out on intercept. We then have a fire call. What caused the overtime? So in my best guess, I tried to stay conservative. And anytime there was an overtime, I just tried to anticipate that it was either the intercept or the transfer that caused it, unless it was notified that there's training, or there's a person on full day vacation, or there was a meeting, those things. So the total overtime for EMS services in 2023 was $32,419.82. That's a number that's inside of the financial statements for EMS. 605 fund. 324.313 hours of clock time was used for vacation, sick, or training purposes. 465.04 of clock time was used for responding to calls. And again, this only looks at the overtime clocked into 605, which we have all fire department names found in the 605 clock-ins, which means that people are clocking into that, even though they're assigned to, say, the 101. So we have 30 individuals, 30 firefighters, right? And so we break them out into thirds and say, okay, a third's in the EMS fund, a third's in protection, and a third's in prevention. But when they come in on overtime for ambulance calls, they are clocking directly into EMS. So it's not as if they're clocking into where they're stationed normally. So this is more of like the meat and potatoes of the question of dollars and cents. Intercepts and interfacility transfers reporting for 2023. One's going to be very, very clear and very easy to explain to you because it's very finite. That's intercepts. But before I get there, what I want to do is I want to show you some trend data. And why it matters is because it tells us where we went from and where we're going to currently, and why we're in a certain situation. So intercepts and interfacility calls. As you can see, noted by the red number, I wanted to really tell you that interfacility calls have been going down over time. I think that's a reference to saying to the staff that they are not taking them because they realize they're trying to save staff time for other things. What are they trying to save it for? Obviously, the emergency cases, 911 calls, fire calls, intercept calls. They're aware of the situation, and they're doing a good job of trying to manage it. Through the data, we can see this. Now, I will want to point out here that the call reporting in here is as of 2023, 12/26/2023. That's when I put this presentation together. That's the data I had. So I was just trying to get you the facts of the situation. There may be some more calls in there. It might not end at 158, but I don't think it's too far off. So then we went into what is the direct input of what it costs to do an intercept. Now, when we send people out on this, it takes 2 people from the EMS staff to go out on one. And we try to break down those components. Drive time, that's labor, about an hour, because you have 30 miles out, 30 miles in. Then you have a performance of an intercept. Let's say we get out of our ambulance, go into the other ambulance, start performing, trying to put that patient into stable condition. As you're driving back to the hospital that is going to take this patient, there's some unload time. And so all of that is kind of wrapped up within that orange part. That's what I anticipate and have looked at the costs to be. Then we have overhead per call. Now, these are items that, as we can see, are supplies, the deputy chief allocation, admin services, depreciation of vehicles, as well as interest on the building and the loan divided by all the calls within inside of 2023. It's a significant number, and that's the wear and tear on everything that we have to talk about. That's what about our average overhead per call is. Now that could change based on how many calls we have, how many supplies we have to order, what those supply prices are doing. But this is my best estimation of what we had based on the data that we have in 2023. Then we also have fuel charges based on, again, 30 miles out, 30 miles in. It's a very, very conservative estimate. We're talking about the furthest that we're going to go out and come back, because we usually don't go beyond 30 miles. That's about the furthest we get. Abbey and Colby Abbey. That's about what we're talking about. So, but we don't always go that far, right? We might go to Stratford, we might go to Spencer, or some of the other outlying townships. So with that, we can see that when there's no overtime, the estimated per intercept call cost is $353.45. Direct input. Why is it direct input? Because we don't wait around 24/7 for these items. We take them when we get them. 911 calls, yes, we have to. That's a little bit different. So when we're on one person on overtime, $458.54. 2 on overtime, $563.63. Now you'll notice that $563 is underneath what our billable rate is. You're right. How often do we have that? Not always so. Again, I've tried to do that. Try to look at the dates that we had 2 people on overtime. And I tried to break that out and show that year. So in essence, what I can find is in the majority of the cases, we are actually making a margin. How much? It's an okay amount. But however, if we were to get rid of this contract, we would have to cover all of the costs as well that are related to all the calls not being covered. So this actually contributes to the bottom line of the EMS fund and helps it out. So these numbers also, the 229, might not match up to the total that I gave you before. Why? Because these are zero balance calls. These are all the calls that were paid to us. Now, I could have brought everything in. I just didn't at the time. From the standpoint that I always like to look at data that's actually closed out, especially with medical data. I'll get into that later. It'll be a lot of fun. So, moving on. Again, now we're switching from intercepts to interfacilities. Interfacility transfers have been decreasing over the last few years. I just want to keep reminding you of that. Denials of transfers continue to occur as Marshfield EMS focuses efforts on 911 and maintaining staffing levels. Most, if not all, again, of the MMC Marshfield pickups transfers go to local assisted facilities. So like if you see on that bottom left part of the graphic, I'm noting that Neelsville is one of the bigger places that we go to and back and forth from. But within inside of Marshfield, we're transporting patients from the hospital to nursing homes or assisted living facilities. That's kind of the secondary large amount. The rest of them, very infrequently are we going to other locations. Now, the one on the right, this is the amount of calls turned down, total over time over the last 4 years. And it ebbs and flows, but it does show you that we're turning down in excess of close to 100 to more than 70 calls a year. So this is where I just want to give like some kind of public service announcements as far as, because interfacility charges go through insurance and patient payments, they take a long time to settle. Think of your own cases at home. How long does it take you to get your EOB from the insurance, to get your hospital bill, your doctor bill, and then everything paid out? It takes a while. So the data is not always right. But I wanted to provide you information on 2023 as best I could, so I'm going to. Usually we would be waiting until June or July of 2024 to look at fully closed out 2023 data. It's not that time yet, but I have what I have. So we can provide examples of individual transfers, costs versus payments that are settled. Keep in mind, the EMS service doesn't know the insurance or payment preference before they take a call. Nor would I want that to happen either. So all transfers, total charges, adjustments, and payments. This is that first top graphic, and I know it's probably really hard to see. I don't know if I can zoom in. Oh my God, I can't. All right, awesome. All right, so that's great. So you can see kind of on this left-hand side, the number of calls, right? So this is interfacilities. So we know that interfacilities are lower in number, but this is kind of the higher amount that we have, kind of closer to what we're totally going to end out with, all right? Total charges, $310,000, total adjustments, $50,000, total payments of $35,000. Now it looks like we're not really making a lot of money on that for 2023. Why is that? Because we're just doing bad and people aren't paying us? No, because it's not June or July yet, and we haven't gotten all of our insurance payments and patient payments in yet. Now, that's reflected in what we would like to call the recovery rate. How much are you recovering on your billed charge? How many payments are you getting per $1,000 or 100? So this is the actual instance of what a settled charge looks like. Out of 158, 41 of them are currently settled, or at least were at the time that I was doing this report. And what we were getting paid at that point in time was on average of a 40% recovery rate. 40% of what we bill out gets paid back, 40 cents on the dollar. So that's equating to about $636 or $637 on average. Now, I won't say that we always have the best case scenarios with everything. Currently, I'm monitoring that there's 20 cases that were unpaid by a Medicaid payer of VAO insurance from 2023 that make up a sizable portion of those gross charges. And yes, I'm asking questions about those. Now, this is some data that's been de-identified. So what I mean by that is I've taken the patient information off of it because I don't want to get sued. So what I'd like to you to see is that it's variable. Insurance is not the same thing, whether you go to Mr. Fire down there, to Mr. Varshow, to Ms. Tompkins, to Mr. Rigel. Everybody's going to pay differently, depending upon their situation status. In the first couple scenarios, we can see that the total charges are relatively the same, are they not? Mm-hmm. The payments aren't. Payments aren't even close. Why that matters? I don't know. Because we live in America and healthcare is all screwed up. So you can see on there, some benefit plan administration in Madison decided just not to pay us and write off the charge fully. We can't go back on that. It's just what it is. United Healthcare, for the first call, decided to pay us $576. VA decided to pay us fully. That's awesome. Makes up for the rest of them. So now, the other point in time, too, is to recognize the cost. I tried my best to do a cost analysis similar to what the intercept was for Neelsville, from the standpoint that around 2 individuals, around the same amount of distance. So the cost is relatively the same. And so I'd like to show you that, I would love to give you, here's exactly how much we made on every interfacility call we did. However, look at the variability between just the examples I've pulled out and why that's very difficult to do. And most of the time, like I said, I would need to wait until everything's closed out to tell you this. So it's not as if I'm dodging questions. It's not as if I don't have the information. It's not as if I have it and I'm withholding it. I'm not. I have it, but here's what I have. So as we can see with overtime, it goes up about almost $100 for cost. And the same thing when we have 2 overtime individuals. And like I said, the payments vary. So I guess what I'd like to say is, so if it's not intercepts, if it's not interfacilities that are causing the issue, what is causing the issue? 911 calls are growing in volume, and not everyone is covered by commercial insurance like they used to be, nor do they pay their patient portion of the bill. I do want to pause to not really addressing so much the question that was in open session regarding the selling of receivables. Medical debt is very hard to collect nowadays, very difficult. So if you were to sell receivables, they would be steeply discounted, probably more so than you would try to get just collecting it yourself. So do you do that in the short-term run, steeply discount your receivables, receive less cash in the near term for a long-term loss? Ask yourself that question if whether that's a good idea, because that's really the answer you should be searching for. I don't have the answer there. Insurance payments from 911 calls should be covering 24/7 coverage for an EMS, but they don't, right? From certain instances, like we can see down here below, which I've tried to, oh my goodness. I've tried to do that analysis of how much per call average payment we get on a 911. It's around $300. I mean, that barely covers our overhead per call by, like about $150. Yeah, but you were talking about having to have staff here at a 24/7 period, just waiting to take the call. And that's costly. But I don't know if every insurance carrier recognizes that. And so that's just what I'm trying to say here is what's the issue? Issue's volume of 911 calls and not being paid for them. I mean, I could say this, like I said in the 4 examples before. You could pay $300. Natasha, you could pay $1,200. Brian, you could pay $0. Mr. Rigel, you could pay $200. And that's what we're working with. That's what we have to work with. So with that, I'll entertain any questions that you have as best I can.
Alderman Werman?
Hey, Jordan, thanks for all of that. It was great info. As you were going through, I had a couple questions that I was just writing down, and it's more, I guess, my own naivety on the process and understanding some things, because you did a really good breakdown. So some things were really clear and other things I was just a little lost. So one of the things that you mentioned was nearby townships, and you couldn't fit all that on here. I think that was part of what Rebecca requested initially when we talked about this. I think, if I remember correctly, so Rebecca, feel free to shake your head. Okay. I would say, I think it was looking at like the amount of calls we're doing to nearby townships to see what we're spending to go out of town. I didn't know if you had that by chance, and if not, it's no big deal, but I did want to see if at some point we could get that, because I think that was brought up.
So there was a request from Mr. Gershman, who was on the PFC or FPC, about the amount of calls that we were doing to different townships. I did an analysis on that briefly. I didn't bring it and put it in this presentation. I didn't realize that was part of this, but I can provide that to you via email.
I think it would be good to see if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it included costs on that one. I thought it was more so revenue. But as far as how many calls that we get, what are the patient payments from those calls, and what are the township calls, but I can gladly share that.
That would be great. This one, I don't know how this works. Is charging like a base rate per trip, is that standard for what like EMS does? Okay.
Yeah, charging a base rate. So basically you have your code of what type of it is. I think it's BLS versus ALS or something like that, advanced life support versus basic life support. And then you have mileage that's tacked on there as well.
Okay.
So, and here's the fun part is like, one would automatically equate this to a grocery store. I charge you $5 and that doesn't cover the cost, so I'm going to charge you $6. And then I'm going to get all the revenue I need for my costs, right? not so much in medical. I have $1,200. I'm going to increase that $1,200 to $1,400. You normally pay me $300, and now you're going to pay me $300. Yep. Work.
So, part of the reason I asked that too is a large chunk of it has to do with this last kind of part you were talking about with the insurance charges.
Yeah.
So I think if anybody here has ever gone to a pharmacy and had to purchase something with insurance, a lot of times you're paying a crap ton out of pocket because they know you have insurance and you can obviously cover that. Sometimes you go without insurance and that rate is a lot lower, or they'll take manufacturer coupons or things like that. So how does that affect, when there is insurance, does our base rate, is that something that can be increased because we know there's insurance and we're obviously not making our money back in a lot of cases? Or is that?
You can to a certain extent. It depends on your mix, right? So in the good old days when we had, patient mix population of having 30 to 40% of working individuals having commercial insurance, you could charge an increased fee and you could get it back in payments. But now, those days have changed, right? We have populations that have changed here. And what I'm really trying to say is potentially aged. And so our Medicare mix is increasing, and Medicaid also, those that are having hardship times, is increasing. And therefore, the discounts on those charges are increasing, and therefore the payments are dropping. And so, yes, you are saying something accurate in certain cases where a person without insurance could go in and get a discount on something. Oftentimes, I think that there's like hardship discounts too. Charity care is another term that I could throw at you. I'm trying not to bog this down. There's a lot here, but yes, you're right. There are changes that you can do to your charges, but only to a certain extent. Otherwise, you're just raising it to lower it.
Sure. Yeah, and that's why I was asking, because I didn't know if we knew, hey, there's insurance, that we're doing ourselves a disservice by having a base rate that's very close. I just wanted to double check.
No, and we have also market indexed our rates too. We have our provider that does that for us because they do so many different services. Might cut out there for a second. But they do so many different services as far as like different townships, different areas, different municipalities. They basically look at our rate and index it against those other ones and look to see if we're comparable, and they said we're comparable. So
one of the other things you mentioned was canceled trips, $100, I believe, per canceled trip, and we actually charge that up to $5,000, which if my third grade math class did me well, I think that's 50 cancellations.
Yes, that's 50 cancellations.
Do we know, are we actually seeing that many cancellations?
I thought the last time I looked at it was around 20 or 30.
Okay, so we're below. I just want to make sure we weren't capping ourselves out. And
yeah, no, we're around 30.
You mentioned for the interfacility, we also have a base fee and mileage fee. Is it the same? Because I noticed that one wasn't listed in there.
I noticed that too. I couldn't quite explain it. I don't know. Are there like supply charges that are included in there too?
Can you repeat that question? Sorry.
Yeah, for the interfacility, it was mentioned that there is also a base fee that we charge and a mileage fee, but I wasn't sure if it's the same base fee and mileage.
Correct. The charges go out. It's the same for everything. So we have a base fee for BLS, as Jordan had said before, ALS 1, ALS 2. It doesn't matter if it's a 911 or an facility, it's the same base rate. Same for mileage. Every mile is the same fee.
Okay, thank you.
I guess I looked at that. I pulled this directly from LifeQuest, and I noticed some differences. I can ask Carrie about it. It's very minimal. I mean, we're talking about some of them are roughly $20. My guess is that middle one, that's $2,300, is probably a different type of, I don't know.
Could have been a different year too as our rates changed.
Could have. You're right.
Yeah, and I was going to say, in terms of those numbers, I'd be interested to see if we could pull anomalies like that are outside of the weird ones and maybe do a little bit of a deep dive to figure out why those ones were so different.
Correct. Yeah, we would actually end up having to go back to, like I said, our data set or maybe even our provider on some of this stuff. Some of this stuff we just don't have visibility into. There was a question that was raised about what the amount of write-offs were for the different townships that are inside the contracts. And I did ask that of our service provider, but I haven't had a response yet. So I am working on that.
Okay. Thank you. Last question I had was Kronos. I'm very limited in Kronos. I've used it. I'm familiar with it, but just vaguely. Is there some sort of error code that can be applied for overtime that you could build out so that if overtime is gone in, instead of using notes, you're able to standardize it with a code and then provide additional details? Or if not, is there anything that we do currently, like with HRs or policy anywhere else in the city where if somebody goes into overtime, we have it classified with certain categories or something like that, where it would help us break this down a little bit better at the end of the year to say, you mentioned competing priorities and what really justifies the overtime. I would assume we would take worst case scenario, whatever we think would be the more expensive one, so that if we're looking at our analytics next year, we could say, we had this much overtime, we're going to assume it's for this type of call, which is going to cost more. I think it would help kind of see that, but I just don't know if there's anything in Kronos that allows you to do that, or if we have something set up by HR already that we could adopt.
I don't want to talk about hypotheticals on this one too much because I've not really dived into that. I know that there's a way of just, the timekeeping system is meant to do just that thing, timekeep. How much time are you here? How much time should you get paid for? We're starting to dive into other ways of trying to classify, which is, I don't know if that's the role of the timekeeping system itself, but they're trying their best with these nodes. Is there codes that they can use? Yes, but they could also show you 3 pages of codes and then they basically run you confused up and down the row because you have 3 pages of codes for your time. And I mean, even a basic user would get very, very confused, or maybe even advanced. Did I use the right code for this? And I'm not trying to belittle the question either. It's just, this is the reality of what we're asking, right? You try to make things more, I guess, easier on the back end, but that makes it more complex just entering it. So I don't know the best answer for that. We can certainly ask BNL, who is our consultant, about it, but I'm not really sure the answer that they would give us.
Yeah, and if we can't do it via Kronos, that's fine. And I understand your point, so I definitely didn't take it in a bad way. My thought is that this past year, that almost a year I've been on the council, there's been a lot of talk about EMS and the need for firefighters and positions that need to be filled. And a lot of that more recently was justified with the amount of overtime we're doing. So I do think if we don't have something in place, we need to get something in place to better understand that. Because it's hard as a council to hear that and say, well, I really want to help, but I'm not understanding what the justification is for the overtime. And how do I quantify that in a way that says we're going to need 2 positions, 1 position, 3 positions, et cetera. So it doesn't have to be anything that's an immediate action of this, but I do think it's something we should continue to track down because it's the only way we're going to better serve those departments.
I think this would be probably even more helpful. So without having to go into all the complex information, let's just look at the top 5 lines, okay? So back in 2019, were you guys fully staffed, right? You had those 3 extra individuals? All right, okay. All right, running roughly about 3,400 calls. So now look at the bottom 2 years and where they had 3,800 calls and 3 less people. 3,400 calls and 3 less people. So let's just, and remember, 2023, that last line is slightly low. It probably has around 3,500 calls. All right, so let's just back up and look at it from that perspective. How many calls per individual? Let's do an average. That's why. And this isn't even including fire calls, by the way. These are just medical EMS service calls.
And if I can just tack onto that, Jordan, it's a great point. And my reason for requesting that is it's really easy for us to say, just look at it as a call, but also we were just talking about like inter-facility calls and driving 30 minutes and how much a driver costs. So if we're really considering all of those things, if we have now 2 people on overtime, but we also have driver time, like we're considering a lot of extra factors that go into that call, and that's why I think that breakdown is needed. So I would definitely agree hours are a big thing, and it's really easy to justify an employee just based on that, but I do think getting a better understanding of the additional cost for that overtime is also important.
Okay. I guess I'd need a lot more direction on that, a lot more. I mean, from an overtime perspective, we can give you the total dollar amounts per overtime per year that we can provide you, but I would need a lot more. It sounds like you're asking for a lot more, so I would need a lot more. And not during audit time, please. Not the next 3 weeks.
Alderman O'Reilly?
Thank you. This one's short and sweet. When you're analyzing the cost of these interfacility transfers and intercepts, the labor, if it is an overtime amount, are you calculating that for the time spent on the call, or I don't know how the contracts read. Is there a minimum hours that they have to use when they come in?
Yeah, this is actually, as you can see it, it's significantly staggered. I'm gonna, go to try to zoom again. It's significantly staggered from the standpoint that there is a 3-hour minimum. So when that 2 people on overtime hits, this is 2 people on a 3-hour minimum. So, and that's also why the basis doesn't matter. And there's no cost provided in that basis line because they're going to be on more time than they're actually going to be doing the call. Good question.
Alderman Tompkins?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, Jordan, that was the most incredible, I don't know if that's called forensic accounting, but that was amazing. I don't know how many hours that took you to do that, but you dug in and found stuff that I don't think anyone has ever found.
Minimum of 8 to 12 hours. I will tell you that's how long it took to answer this question.
Wow.
And this presentation.
Wow. Okay, thank you for that. So for the intercepts, I am just wondering, we only do intercepts for the townships that we have agreements with. Is that correct or no?
Intercepts are a little different, but why don't you answer?
So the intercepts are for any outlying ambulance at a lower level than us that is requesting help. We've intercepted with Black River Falls, for example, Athens ambulance. They're on their way into Marshfield and they need higher level. So not the townships we have contracts with.
Okay, and just for the public who's listening, the Marshfield ambulance has paramedics, and so they can offer a much more advanced medical situation. So oftentimes they'll get called by EMTs who are running ambulances who can't do what our paramedics can do.
Correct. Most of the time we get called from a BLS service which has EMTs. We do get occasionally calls from intermediate services. They can do more than EMTs, more medications, more skills. Paramedic is the top level for EMS, where we can do advanced airways, other skills, and a whole litany of medications.
Okay. And then just one question again for you. So thank you for being up there.
Oh, you're welcome.
So for the interfacility calls, is there a policy in place, or would you consider putting a policy in place that said, when we have one person in overtime, we're no longer, do you have something like that? Because we now know that 2 in overtime, we're really starting to lose money. So what kind of policy is?
Yep. So when a request for interfacility comes in, we look at several factors. First, we've learned over the years that not all requests are equal. We've had requests for absolute life-saving transfers. We put a high priority on those. Probably the biggest example for that one would be our neonate calls. Those are our infants, newborns that are coming into Marshfield because we have a very good pediatric center here. Those put a high priority on. We will call in overtime for those. The lower level where a hospital is transporting to another hospital because they have an open bed, for example. If it's going to cause overtime, we've been turning those down. But we are doing the best we can to limit overtime.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And as a sobering image, bottom right, top line. Those are the turn downs.
Any other questions, comments from the council? Otherwise, thank you again, Jordan, for the great work and the great presentation.
And all my
Certainly
team members
appreciate
too.
Item S, response to request by Councilmember O'Reilly, cooperation between the Fairgrounds Commission and the Central Wisconsin State Fair Board, presented by Steve Barr, City Administrator.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, Jordan's report, which was excellent, by the way, came from a council request. My next 3 items also come from previous council requests. This is one of them. Councilmember O'Reilly had brought up back on February 13th, asking a couple things about the fairgrounds. One is, have the commission and the Central Wisconsin State Fair Board had any joint meetings? He hearkened back to a meeting back in September, a very good meeting, by the way, that addressed some of the frustrations and the tensions that were being felt back in the summer of 2023. They met in tandem at the 2nd Street Community Center. I was there for that meeting, good discussion, and they came out of it with some positive feelings. Also the idea that they should get back together periodically to continue joint conversations. The other question that Councilmember O'Reilly was asking about was what's a current list of capital projects, what's going on with those as far as fairgrounds property improvements. So you have a memo in the packet, I'll just kind of briefly highlight it. There has not been a joint meeting of the Central Wisconsin State Fair Board and the Fairgrounds Commission since that time. I do understand from talking with Justin and looking at some of the minutes from recent meetings since September that there have been members of the Central Wisconsin State Fair Board who've been at the some of the meetings of the Fairgrounds Commission to represent them. And I did talk to Dale Christensen, and they are going to invite the Fairgrounds Commission to the next meeting of the Central Wisconsin State Fair Board in March. They're going to have a time set aside for the two sides to have discussion, interest of or issues that are of interest to both of them, maybe giving updates for what's going on their end, and keep that conversation going. The last thing anybody wants, and I think this is why Mike brought this up, is to wake up at some time and find out that the goodwill and the positive conversation from last September fades into the sunset. So I think it's good to make sure that that doesn't happen. As far as the list of capital projects, the main things I've been working on recently are the new expo and office feasibility study, updating the campus master plan, and as we all know, the repairs to the electrical panels that they've been talking about. They've been talking about for a while. A lot of discussion about electric work that needs to be done, and some that's been completed already to upgrade the electrical service out there at the fairgrounds. There's also a litany of other projects, so you see on my memo and the pages that follow that I got from Justin. So they're working on a lot of things over time. You see things like the Knoll Barn relocation, Wenzel family stage, roof and lights, horse area covering, more electrical panel work. A lot of things are listed on that list that you have in front of you. So those projects continue to be worked on as time and money allow. And I would take any questions.
Alderman O'Reilly.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, that was a good report, I guess, to see. And like you said, my main concern was that there was very good will leaving that meeting. And it's still concerning to me that we're sitting in the same place we were. We do have members, obviously, attending meetings, but the whole purpose of it was, in my memory, to create lists for maintenance and prioritize those so that we could establish a pattern to develop this. And there was a lot of talk about potentially addressing more money toward those things so that we can take care of them. And my concern with what I saw brought forward is we're looking at new shiny things again and not taking care of what we have. And it's frustrating to me because that was a productive meeting, and it just seems to me like it's fallen by the wayside, and we presented a bunch of stuff that tried to make it acceptable to skip those meetings. But ultimately, we are not doing those meetings, and I do recall that being quarterly. And when I look back, I believe it was August 8th when I saw the stuff from that last meeting, and now we're only a few weeks away from 6 months beyond that point, and we still haven't seen one of those meetings, and I'm still not hearing any discussion about having that meeting. So I don't know, it's frustrating, but hopefully we can move it forward and keep goodwill moving in the right direction.
Well, and maybe one of the goals for that meeting in March is to present and discuss some of those items, because you're right, maintenance is a critical piece of this as they look at new projects and stuff to make sure that the grounds are being kept up and things are being taken care of the way they're supposed to be. I get it. So hopefully we can get those kind of agenda items out of that discussion for March.
Alderman Wagner?
Yes, ma'am, thank you. Two things. Number one is that list of improvements that the city has paid for that Mr. Casperson prepared, I believe. I was astounded. I guess I served 8 years on the Central Wisconsin State Fair Board, and the happiest day in my life was when I left it. But the problem with it is both the Fairgrounds Commission and the Fair Association consider themselves to be institutions in us, and they consider themselves independent, and basically it's very hard to get them to cooperate with somebody else. Mike did a good job, I think. Mike Fire, about I don't know how many years ago that was. You got the money for the windows in the round barn and the model we used for the cooperation then still might work. I mean, what it means is that the Fair Association says we need, they tell the commission, and the commission comes back to the council and says we need, and they put it up. The project gets done. It's overseen by the board or by the commission, and God's in his heavens, all rights with the world. It doesn't always work that way though, and I understand your frustration. And but did anybody want a tape on those numbers that you gave us for the amount of money the city spent on the fairgrounds on city territory? Oh, nobody? Okay, I'll run a tape on it tomorrow. It was in the packet. But again, I sympathize with you and wish you the best of luck.
Alderman Werman?
Thank you. Yeah, so I am actually on the Fair Board. And so there is a joint meeting that will be coming up that we discussed at the last Fair Board meeting where they were extending the invite out. They have been not just attending meetings, but working with the Fair Commission as well. So as a reminder of the breakdown, like the Fair Board is really primarily responsible for maintaining, but also planning the fair. And the Fairgrounds Commission is really kind of deciding where money gets spent and what projects to focus on. And both groups have been heavily involved in the potential new expo building and how that's all working out. So that's been a bulk of where the emphasis has been placed, at least in terms of attention-wise, which is probably part of the reason for the delay in the meeting, because there's a lot going on around that and what's going to work and what buildings are actually going to have to be updated as a result, because there isn't a solidified plan. It's still in process. Outside of that, obviously the electrical repairs have been the primary focus of that group to make sure that they're good to go. In fact, one of the more recent updates was, I think last year there was a bunch of talk about the campground electrical, and that was one where they actually met with the inspector, talked through whether or not if the new expo building were to go in, if that's going to affect the electrical, and it sounds like it's not. So the intent is to move forward and fix that as well. So that's all positive stuff. Everything's been really good. It's just this is kind of throwing a wrench in everything right now to just kind of work through that. And then and I might be just looking for clarity on this. I think the projects that Justin sent over were city-owned buildings that were invested in, right? It was just city-owned stuff? Yeah, city-owned property. Okay. So I would say the other stuff that the fair is working on too, I think is also, I mean, there is a split in what the fair owns and what the city owns. And so that would explain where a lot of that is getting reinvested back into the city as well. So just to provide a little extra clarity.
Alderman Fire?
Years ago, we had a list of about 50 items that had to be done. And we prioritized, we went 1 through 50 and we picked, but you only have $50,000, which means it doesn't, in this day and age, $50,000 won't go very far. That's what they have to do. And the Fair Commission knows this. Tom's been on with, when I was there, he knows how to do this. They're just dragging their feet. Get a list out there and you do what you can afford. And if you can't afford it, then we would go to the county and the city and look for extra money. They have to say, we save the grandstand and the exhibition building with extra money beyond the $50,000. So it's everybody's fault. They're just not putting a list.
Any other comments, questions? There's no action, just for information purposes, and thank you for the update. Item T, response to request by Councilmember Rigel pursuant of various goods services presented by Steve Barg, City Administrator.
Thank you, Mayor. This was not only by Councilmember Rigel, but I think Councilmember Werman also brought up some things along the same line back in the summer, and I apologize it's taken so long. This can kind of be a broad brush on procurement in the city of Marshfield. I included information in the packet. Hopefully get a chance to look at it if you haven't already. From the state of Wisconsin, there's a nice piece that Tom Turchi gave me that really shows a good outline of how the Wisconsin statutes affect that and how you have to do bidding in the public sector. I also included the procurement policies from the city, 4.800 and 4.810, to talk about how we have some parameters around how we procure public services as well. So real briefly, I'll just kind of touch on some of the stuff, then take any questions. The main things we deal with are, and this terminology is very important here because we talk about words like bids and quotes and estimates kind of all sometimes, in one pot. Bids are required for public construction, and that would be like infrastructure, buildings, facilities, those kind of things, including repairs, maintenance. And it's required when there's a project that's estimated to cost greater than $25,000. Now I'm talking state law. This is where this comes from. Wisconsin statutes 6215 and 660901 is where a lot of the oversight comes from. Those statutes also set forth the requirements, public notice, and all the other things that have to be fulfilled to meet the statutes are very clearly detailed in those two portions of Wisconsin law. And the city is required, this is something noteworthy, the city is required to pick the lowest responsible bidder. And we see this sometimes where we maybe have a project of this type and a question comes up as to whether or not somebody has had a problem with a previous city contract, whether they did good work, do we want them again? There's a high burden placed on communities to make sure that they are picking the lowest responsible bidder. In fact, you really would have to find a reason to disqualify someone. Now, one of the things that Tom and his staff do as part of their process is they pre-qualify bidders for projects, and it gives them a chance to kind of look at some information to see that the bidders on the projects are in fact qualified to do the work. But we're kind of locked in. You can't just say, well, I like bidder number 2, even though they were higher. You're pretty well tied on those. Under city policies, procurement of other goods and services, again, I referenced 4.800 and 4.8100 or 4.810. 4.800 gives kind of broad direction. It talks about how we do things here as far as procuring services and goods, includes compliance with state law, talks about our internal procedures. The one that's got a little bit more meat to it that I want to cover tonight is 4.810. That requires competitive bids whenever a major purchase or a professional service is expected to cost $25,000 or more. And you've seen this before, some of the contracts we have for assessing or auditing, or the Vanderwall contract for West 2nd Street project, where we come to you and we're expecting it to be more than $25,000. So we go out for quotes. Now we do this because it's required, but we also do it because it's good practice. When we do that, we typically come up with some contractors, firms that we think will be good candidates. We may go beyond that with even further advertising to try and get more people into the process. There are 2 methods. There's a request for proposal and request for qualifications. You hear staff members, including me, probably primarily me, throw around the letters a lot, RFQ and RFP. So why? What's the difference? RFPs are for projects or services that are typically specific and easily quantified. I mentioned assessing, I mentioned auditing, and the Vanderwall project for 2nd Street. There's an expectation clearly set forth. Here's the project, here's the scope of it, here's going to be the payment, here's what we are looking for the contractor or the consulting firm to do. A form is drafted and submitted to the Board of Public Works or Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee, ultimately given blessing by the council before we actually release the RFP. Generally, a greater effort, as I said, is made to locate possible proposers with RFPs. They're often reviewed by a team who makes recommendations to the elected officials as to who should be selected. And typically they result in a contract being signed. That's what you most often see with requests for proposals. Requests for qualifications is a little bit fuzzier in some ways. It's usually for less defined time and limit scopes. We've done RFQs for labor law, done them for more recently for the planning related services and the economic development services we're going through right now. There's generally a time and materials component. It's not a contract that will pay you X amount of money to do this for X amount of time. It's usually, we'll pay you $150 an hour for as many hours as you put in to perform this service. Thinking labor law, we don't have a contract with our labor law firm. We just have an agreement that as long as we have them, we will pay this amount for this employee to do this work, depending upon the attorney or the staff member that we have. The proposals, or actually the submissions, I'll call it, may be reviewed by a team. Recommendations may be made to elected officials, but not always. We just went through a process recently with insurance consultant. We used to have M3, and we had them for many years, but staff did a process to actually find, and we secured Brown & Brown to be our insurance consultant. There's no contract, there's no defined anything. It's just somebody to advise staff as to how to best advise the council on how we can save money and provide the best insurance coverage for our employees. So it doesn't always end up being that type of team or committee at the end, like an RFP would be. And typically, the results of RFQs are not binding the city for any extended period of time. It's while we like it, we're getting along with them, they're getting along with us, and things are going well. One more thing I want to note is estimates. I know that there was a concern recently about an estimate that was brought forth for the bathroom project at Wenzel Family Plaza. An estimate is really just an idea of trying to get a sense of what a project would cost before we dive into whether or not we want to take it on. It's not even a quote. It's some consulting firm or some contractor who we've gone to and said, look, we're looking at doing project XYZ. What do you think it might cost before we bring it into the hopper with our elected officials? If ultimately we decide from an estimate with the council on board that we want to go out and try and find someone to do the work, we will do a more formal RFP to find someone, or a bid if that's what's appropriate to do the work. One more thing, Assembly Bill 723 is going through the process right now. If approved and if signed by the governor, which could be in the spring, that would, among other things, raise the current $25,000 threshold for bidding on public construction to $50,000. It's not known whether that'll make it to the finish line, but if that happens, that will obviously affect how we bid up our projects as well by doubling the minimum requirement that triggers that public bidding. So with that, I hope it's a good overview. I would take any questions that anybody has on how we look for goods and services.
Alderman Weigel.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Barr. Just maybe oversaw this or overlooked, excuse me, but is there any requirement as far as the number of RFPs, RFQs to be sent to different people? In other words, how many people do I have to contact for an RFQ?
How many firms we want to engage?
Right.
It really depends. Certainly with an RFQ, I'm typically looking for qualified firms that I want to send it to that I think can do the work. Maybe you find them through the League of Wisconsin Municipalities directory. That's where I got most of the ones for the current one we're doing on economic development consulting. Maybe you're aware of them from other communities that you've talked to. Sometimes as you get into RFP, you're more into just broad advertising as well, where you're looking for all sorts of companies maybe that you're not even aware of that might provide the service. But there's no requirement in either one of those two that says you have to get 5 or 3 or 7. I sent to 7 firms for the economic development consulting service. It's always good to get, I think, 3 at a minimum for comparison if they'll submit proposals to you. But I'll tell you what, some services it's hard to find providers. If it's very, very specialized, you may not get as many companies as you'd like in the mix.
Right, and I guess then you kind of just drove at my point there is that the reason I had asked for this was because at one point in time we had just gotten one number and we ran with it. And there wasn't any policy to protect us from ourselves of running with just one number. So we couldn't say, hey, we have to stop, we have to get another number here for comparison's sake. We just ran with that. And I know, we've got the Wisconsin statutes there that kind of dictate, or at least create the framework of where we have to operate. But I think it'd be good practice to create a catch-all for the city of Marshfield saying anything above 25,000 or just whatever the number is, that if it's going to be a significant amount of money, we need to have at least multiple bids, not to say, 7, 10 or anything like that, but at least go out and obviously create a caveat on there where if it's specialized enough and we get a bunch of no quotes or no bids, okay, at least we did our due diligence, but, only one responded, okay, we'll have to go with that one. But it's one of the things that worries me that I think we can hurt ourselves just by trying to oversimplify it. I'm not trying to create another step, but I also am trying to avoid a potential mistake that could cost us thousands of dollars. And frankly, the city's not in any position to sacrifice any amount of money.
I think in the public works world, we have some real difficulty, Tom is stepping up, where we don't often in asphalt and some of our other projects, there aren't that many bidders that we get.
After being here for several decades, we've had projects where we've bid it out. We've had 5 or 6 different companies looking at it, and only one comes back. But then at that point, we compare it to what we have as our engineer's estimate and see if it's comparable to that. Yeah. In one instance, we actually said the project came in 20% higher than our estimate. We basically said, let's bid it again next spring. And then their American Asphalt, our asphalt bids, in the last 2 and 3 decades, we've never had anyone else bid.
Right, but at least you've gone out for a second bid. Right, and I guess that's my point. In practice, we're doing it. Yeah. It's just, I'm saying in policy, because we could be sitting up here with different people in 5 years. Everyone gets replaced, and we have someone who's not as diligent as Tom is here, and we're now hurting ourselves. So it's not a rush. It's not a, hey, we need to drop what we're doing right now and get it, but it's probably good practice to get something in place to protect ourselves from ourselves here with potentially loosey-goosey bids.
Yeah, and I think that the one you're referring to, somebody went out and actually kind of actively solicited one firm to propose and make a quote or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, no, I mean, if we ever come up with projects that are $25,000 or more and we don't have at least two quotes on it, I'm pretty uncomfortable coming to a public body. If that's all it is, I mean, ultimately we may have to do it, but it's not where you want to be. You don't have anything for comparison to determine, apart from staff trying to evaluate the true cost of the service, whether or not 30,000 or 50,000 or 80,000 is really a real good bid.
Right, exactly. I think we're all on the same page, but I think I'd like to see it in writing so we have a policy there. So if we do accidentally at some point go derelict and only get one bid, it's a protection from us of just advancing with that, saying, hold on, we need at least a second one here. Or at least try to get a second one. But okay, I'll sign a piece. I think everyone's getting tired.
Agreed. Alderman Werman?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing Andy said, and then, so I'm glad you brought it up. And then I had a couple quick follow-ups. One was, he mentioned estimates, which was another one that I had on my mind, and that was really going to be, when we request an estimate, are we required to provide anything per any of these agreements, like in terms of budget numbers? Because I think part of my concern when we got to the Wenzel bathroom was seeing the estimate come back right at the budget or really close to the budget. And I'm like, I don't know if that was coincidental. I don't want to accuse anybody of anything, so I'm not going to say that it was. But in that instance, can you request an estimate without providing a budget?
Yeah, I guess what you're saying is if we lock in and we assume the estimate to be, what we want to use as a budget number, do we have enough behind that estimate to suggest that we feel confident that's going to be the cost of the project?
Yeah, without providing an initial budget to say, well, we know we have this much available. We'd like an estimate on this project. And they come back and they're like, hey, what do you know? That's what it costs.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't know ultimately when we bid out a project like Wenzel Family Restrooms or anything else, if it's going to come out to be near the budget or 80% of the budget. I don't know. But it's a reasonable question to say what was the contractor told in terms of proposing it, and what did they include in their as their rationale for what they came up with?
Yeah, so to Andy's point, stuff like that, having that in writing just so we know, that would be great. And then the other follow-up I had, and this is probably going to be for Hap because he looks bored tonight, there was two statements in there, and you brought up one of them already, which was that it has to go to the lowest responsible bidder. Mm-hmm. And then there was another section in here about except when necessary to secure federal aid, a political subdivision may not use a bidding method that gives preference based on the geographic location of the bidder or that uses criteria other than the lowest responsible bidder. And I know several times when we've been in discussions in here, we've been like, oh, this person's local, don't we want to look at that? And I just kind of wanted to get Hap's take on that because obviously these are very generalized terms and using words like responsible, that's very subjective. So I was kind of curious your thoughts on how do we, I guess, if you will, for lack of a better word, quantify that in a way that we can say like, hey, they weren't the lowest bidder, but they also didn't meet this criteria that we were looking for, or, just because they are local, that's not why we're awarding them the bid.
So when you're talking about that's typically in reference to the specific bidding statute where it is required that you put it out for bid and then it comes back and you have to provide the work to the lowest responsible bidder. So there's a statute that controls that. And then because of that, there's statutory interpretation of what that means to be the lowest responsible bidder and what it means to be somebody that might not be responsible. So there's case law that's developed around that. So while those terms may not be familiar to you, there is a reference back to that for purposes of evaluating that from a legal perspective. And the answer is, you in that setting, you can't take into account at all whether they're local or not. That's not a factor that can be used if you're bidding under the statute. Now, there are times when we fall back on our own policy where you're bidding and we're looking for that, and we, presumably are looking to provide, but we're not bound by that in that setting. If it's the statute, then there's not an option.
Yeah, if I can add to that too, local preference was something that was done more formally by some communities in the old days. They actually gave quantifiable. I knew communities back in earlier in my career that were saying, look, if we're bidding on squad cars, for example, we'll give a 2% preference to local bidders. So if you know, the local Ford dealership in your community says they'll sell you a squad car for $29,000 and the one down the road in another community says $28,000, we may be buying it from the local because we're giving them a 2% break. I didn't do the math, but you know, that's generally not considered to be acceptable anymore for a number of reasons, including the fact that your taxpayers may wonder why they're paying more for, you know, services and goods that they're getting. But certainly with quotes that we do from RFPs, you don't have to pick the lowest one anyway. You could get one at $27,000, one at $32,000, one at $39,000. If you think the one at $32,000 better understands your project, maybe they're local and that's why they've got a better handle on what you're looking for, you can certainly go with them.
Any other comments, questions? Seeing none, move on to item U. Report use of bullet points under committee minutes on council agendas presented by Steve Bark, City Administrator.
Thank you. This one will be fairly short. It came up, I believe, at the last meeting. You know, when we looked at the way I bullet point certain items on the agenda under committees like Finance, Budget, and Personnel, Board of Public Works, Plan Commission, what goes into that as far as calling them out where the council will see them more readily whether they've read the minutes or not. When I came here back in 2011, we didn't do that. I adopted that back in 2015 after realizing that sometimes your busyness, you don't read all the minutes, you don't see everything. I want to make sure that certain items at a certain level are being called out for you to notice and to make sure that you're consciously approving them as part of the consent agenda. So I did nothing amazing or magical. If you see what I had in the packet, at that time I floated the idea of 7 categories, which I believe I did bring to the council just to kind of get a blessing. But here's what the categories were. That any of these that I become aware of from those committees that are being recommended for approval by the council under consent need to be called out. Resolutions, contracts, leases, policies, purchases of equipment of $10,000 or more, personnel items such as hiring, promotions, pay grade changes, and any significant changes in our operational direction. That one's a little bit harder to define, but something that is noticeably changing the way we're going to do things from past practice. So I'm not saying this is a perfect system. I'm not saying I haven't missed one of these over time. I maybe have, but it just seemed like a reasonable place to land to say that these are noteworthy enough to place under the agenda with a bullet point. I would take any questions. I would take any suggestions for change if you don't feel this is helpful, but it's kind of what I came up with and thought it would be a compromise between having everything called out, every motion made, and not calling out anything when some of these are pretty significant in nature.
Alderman Werman?
Yeah, I'll make this quick. Thank you. I know this was my request, and this would be hugely helpful. I had one suggestion to add, and that would be votes decided after or by a broken tie.
Oh.
I think would be good because it'd be interesting to see. There's a lot of votes that go on in these commissions, committees, et cetera. It would be good to see where parties were having a tough time making a decision and how that decision was decided, so we know if we should pull that out as a discussion item.
So anything that was recommended for approval that was not unanimous, perhaps?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking more tiebreaker votes. I don't know that we want to review or highlight every vote that wasn't unanimous, but I think if it comes down to a very split decision in groups, I think that would be important to see.
Like a 3-2 kind of thing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts?
Alderman Tompkins?
Thank you. The reason I think this was requested was because we were going over the vacation policy and there had been a change. The final draft of that policy had been presented to Finance, Budget, and Personnel. We had approved it, and so it was in the consent agenda, but it hadn't been pulled out. So when I look at your list, and policies is one of the lists, on the list, should that have just been pulled out because that's on your list, because it was a new vacation policy?
It was a bullet point, but you mean, should it have been noted that it was modified slightly from the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee version to the council? Is that what happened?
No, it was modified from when it was first presented to the council, and then it went back to HR, modified. Am I correct with that? And then it was presented in final form to Finance, Budget, and Personnel, was then in the consent agenda. But it was pulled from the consent agenda, but Mr. Werman had sort of said, why was this hidden in the consent agenda? So I'm just wondering if that would have fallen under your criteria as a new policy that should have been pulled anyhow.
Well, yeah, new policies and amended policies, and I think I had the vacation policy bullet pointed under Finance, Budget, and Personnel. And I think you saw that, right? But the question was whether or not it was still in the same form or the same document that you'd seen previously. I'm still trying to get my arms around what the issue was. I'm sorry.
I think I'm confused. So when you bullet point it, what does that look like? Because I'm reading these consent agendas. Are you doing something special?
It'll say like, yeah, and the bullet points, if were there any tonight, it just says like, under finance, budget, and personnel, it'll say, approve, yeah, thank you. In this case, approve refilling vacant senior coordinator position. Approve payroll resolution for seasonal pay. Those are items that I'm calling out because they were recommended for approval by the body. And I believe vacation was on that list that night. But there was discussion about, and I'm forgetting how it went, as to whether or not it had been modified or changed in format along the way.
So okay, this is great clarification then. So you are not pulling these things out for council vote?
No, I just want people to see them so they know that, because if you look at a lot of the minutes, for example, take Board of Public Works. They may be approved putting a stop sign at the intersection of Galvin and Becker or whatever, or changing the stop signs there. I'm not saying that that's not important. I'm just saying that if you were to take every motion from every committee and bullet point it underneath the minutes, it'd be a long list. So I'm literally, and I admit, I'm kind of fudging on this because you could all argue where the line is, but I'm trying to call out what might appear to be the more significant decisions that you're approving by the motion to accept the consent agenda.
So then, Steve, what makes you go from something that's a bullet point to then actually bringing it for the council vote? So for instance, finance, budget, and personnel, we approved the lighting for the communications, but it came to council to vote. So what made you decide that?
That's budget resolutions. And it's by ordinance that budget resolutions and ordinances must be separate items on the agenda. I know it seems weird to put, think that Tom made the exact same presentation that he made last week to the committee, and he made it again to you. But I think budget resolutions are considered to be at the level. Yeah, good point. Jennifer's reminding me that they take 7 votes of the entire body, which could never happen at finance, budget, and personnel, which is the same kind of thing as ordinances. No. But ordinances require full body approval ultimately, so they've typically been, separate items.
So are there any other things besides budget resolution ordinances that you would pull for our full vote?
Not normally. In fact, if you look at Chapter 3 of the city ordinance, it actually lays out the format, and it actually calls out budget resolutions and ordinances being separate. But no, when I look at, let's say there were 8 items on the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee, I look at them and I find that 5 of them fit into the categories of contracts, resolutions, whatever. I pull those out and bullet point them. If one of them was a budget resolution, I pull it out and make it its own separate agenda item. And then if the other 2 are, don't fit in any category, they're minor things that are not of this type of substance, I don't call them out.
Okay, so that would be a discussion maybe for a future time, but the vacation policy was a pretty significant policy, so we might need to have maybe a broader, some other things that might get pulled out for the full vote, whether it's this will potentially change our budget by a certain percentage or things like that. Just something we can think about in the future.
Yeah, and maybe I'm wrong. I've kind of counted on one or more council members to pull it off consent agenda to have that discussion, but sometimes the committee themselves, this has happened in my 13 years here, where the committee has come to almost a point where they couldn't agree on whether to give thumbs up or thumbs down, and they've said, let's just send it to the council with no recommendation and let the 10 people hash it out. So that happens too. I'll do whatever the body wants. I developed the system just to try and, again, call attention to items that seem fairly important. But whatever your purview is, if you want to make them separate items, I don't think you want to make them all separate items, or you're going to be getting presentations, double presentations every time between the staff meeting or the meeting at Board of Public Works or Finance, and then coming to here like you do with budget resolutions.
And if I could jump in and just ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay. So Steve puts bullet points out, but we as a council, you as a council, can bring anything else out. It's not that just because Steve brings it out, that's what we're going to talk about.
Right.
So by you, Derek, doing that last council meeting, it's all acceptable. So we can do as a body, you 10 folks can do what you want. Steve's just helping to make it easier for us to understand, you guys to understand that this is how it works. Does that sound right?
Yeah, and to take my example, going back to Board of Public Works, I mean, somebody on the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee could be reading the minutes and saying, I don't agree with changing the traffic flow and the signage at Becker and Galvin, and I want to talk about it. It just seems overkill to call out all those items on the agenda. But again, your purview.
And if I could clarify, you're 100% right. And to kind of explain what Natasha was trying to ask, I had asked about it. Well, actually, Mike pulled it out last week. I had tacked on, I didn't realize that because it was in the consent agenda, that meant that was final because they had already approved it. So it was just going through. So as I was reading through it, seeing these bullet points like this, I think helps to say like, oh, that's an important item. Like that may be something I want to pull out. So regardless of whether or not I'm reading through the notes, it still qualifies as something like, hey, that's a big deal. And that was the reason for the ask. So I think you nailed it. So as long as nobody else has anything, I much appreciate it.
Yeah, I don't think you'd ever, for example, I don't think you ever want to wake up and find out that you approved a contract, in consent agenda and you didn't realize it. It maybe obligated you to 3 or 5 years of some type of service. So, thank you.
Any other questions? We'll move on to item V, second reading of appointment of Elizabeth Lemoyne, 806 West 5th Street, to the Committee on Aging to complete the vacant term ending in April of 2026. We have a motion by Alderman O'Reilly, second by Alderman Weigel. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, please vote. And that motion passes. Thank you. Item W, second reading of appointment to Becky Hebner-Lou, 1313 East 26th Street, to the Committee on Aging to complete the vacant term ending in April of 2025. Alderman Fire, motions. Alderman Giles, seconds. And Alderman Wagner as a comment.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, Mrs. Giles isn't here tonight, but you remember, I think there are only 3 of us on this council who were here during the pretty rough days with the issues with the police department. And what happened is Mrs. Liu was a frequent speaker at the podium during that period of time. And one of the themes that she reiterated many times was that she was very much afraid that her appearances and her voicing her opinion on what was going on would result in retaliation, or I think she used the word retribution. I wanted her to know that there is no retribution, there is no retaliation. Basically, first of all, the mayor had enough faith in her to put the nomination forward. And secondly, I am going to give her my vote, even though we were diametrically opposed during that period of time. And I wish her the best and good luck on that committee. Just to let you know, there is no retribution. There are no damages being done here. Thank you very much.
Any other comments, questions? Seeing none, please vote. Motion passes. Thank you. Congratulations, ladies. Welcome to the Committee on Aging. Item X, set date, time for special council meeting on preparation for the 2025 budget presented by Steve Barg, City Administrator.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, we've talked recently, staff believes it, and council certainly does as well. It'd be good to have 1 or more meetings in advance of the 2025 budget process. Early, not in October, but getting ahead of this, because we got a lot of challenges. We've talked about the utilities pilot. We know about the clinic case still going on. Tonight we talked about the compensation issue. So we've got some things to get ahead on and start tackling them and figure out how we're going to address them and what framework we want to use to try to make decisions as we go through the year. So we kind of agreed it would be good to have a budget session before a regular meeting. Seemed like the best alternative, so we don't have to book people for other meetings. I kind of thought maybe at 5 o'clock with the regular meeting backed up at 6:30. So we'd get, an hour and 20 minutes or so, take a short break, and then get into the regular business after that. I targeted in the memo you saw for Tuesday, March 26th. I'm an empty nester, so I never thought about the prospect of people, with the spring break, perhaps having kids in school and maybe being out and about doing other things. It's come to my attention there might be a couple of you who are affected by that. So I'm open to other dates if another date would work better. We can talk about that. But I really do think the idea of meeting at 5 o'clock for near an hour and a half and then having the regular business after that is probably the best way to do it, to avoid booking other nights for people. So I take any thoughts people have on that. If you want to go ahead with the 26th of March, staff is prepared to do that. If you want to suggest another night, that would be good as well.
We have a motion by Alderman Werman, second by Alderman Varsho. Alderman Tompkins?
Could we postpone it for 1 week later or 1 week before, or 2 weeks, sorry, just so that we don't conflict with spring break?
Talking about April 9th? I'm sorry, did I misunderstand you?
I don't have a calendar.
But 2 weeks after the 26th of March, yeah. The only concern I would throw out about that, because that makes sense, is, we start getting real close to the election. Actually, the election's on the 2nd of April. We could theoretically be bringing on new members, but life goes on. I mean, we have an election here every year, so at some level, you don't always wait till the third week in April to have meetings. If April 9th works better for people, we can certainly do that.
And I'm sorry, I need a clarification. Alderman Werman, your motion?
My motion was originally to go with the staff approval of March 26th at 5 p.m.
And Alderman Varsho, is that second? Okay, so what is, yes, Alderman Tompkins?
I would like to amend the date of the meeting to April 9th at 5:30.
5:30 or 5?
Or 5.
5.
We have a motion by Alderman Tompkins to amend and a second by Alderman Stauber.
Vote on the amendment. Vote on the amendment.
Mm-hmm. And now, please vote on the amendment. The amendment passes with 2 nays. Now we go back to the original motion, which was for the 26th of March.
Except it now will be April 9th.
Which is now going to be April 9th.
But still at 5 o'clock.
Great. So now we just vote one more time. We'll vote one more time. And that motion passes with the same result.
Thank you.
So we will meet at 5 o'clock on Tuesday, April 9th, before the regular meeting, which will then be at 6:30.
Yep.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Item Y, suggested items for future agendas. Alderman Werman?
I just had one quick one. With Carrie just joining the team, which welcome. I think we have a rare opportunity to get some insight from a new employee over the next several council meetings. And it doesn't have to be every council meeting. It could be over the next month to 2 months. But I think it would be really good to see a new employee perspective on some of the gaps, struggles, and maybe process inefficiencies that we have as they get into this role. And that might help better drive council as we get into budget season and understanding of grants and whatnot.
Okay.
Anyone else? Seeing none, we're going to adjourn to closed session under Wisconsin Statute Chapter 19.851E, deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. Possible short-term lease of city-owned property. And number 2, development agreement for sale of parcels in Daniels Addition. We have a motion by Alderman Weigel, second by Alderman Werman. All those in favor, please vote. We are in closed session. Thank you.
Help people through